Hi, it's Dennis Daly. The death of the Reverend Billy Graham could not have come at a worse time in the history of this nation if for no other reason than a major voice of moderation is gone. This is an era where there seems to be no middle ground. The stalemate in Washington, made worse by a rising tide of posturing and name-calling, is the kind of intransigence that flies in the face of all that Dr. Graham preached against. Although he was traditionally aligned with the more conservative side of American society and politics, his constant call to follow the dictates of Christ, feed the poor, take care of the oppressed, seemed to be a more moderate and charitable course than the signals he may have been sending due to his association with prominent GOP leaders. Dr. Billy Graham's death is a huge loss, even though in his later years he may have left the giving out of the message to others. He was here, among us, looming large, a call for charity and moderation. As a kid growing up in a Catholic home in rural southern Indiana, I had an interesting way of looking at Dr. Graham. I remember in 8th grade telling one of the nuns at my school that I thought maybe Billy Graham was the Protestant Pope. Her retort was half scolding, half smiling. I'm sure she understood what I meant. I also remember feeling good about sharing my positive feelings about Graham and his growing ministry to the nun. Just the year before, on the playground, she'd come up to me and asked me why I was singing a Protestant hymn. It was "In the Garden." "What do you know about that song?" she asked. "My mother was a Protestant before marrying my dad, and she plays all that stuff on the piano," I said. "Start it again," the nun said. I did, and she sang along. "Why do you know it?" I asked. "Same reason," she answered. I guess when it had come time to share my feelings about Billy Graham with her later, I felt safe. Graham, from his earliest days, seemed to exude a kind of gentle authority whenever and wherever he spoke. Even though I wasn't sure that I should be watching, Catholic upbringing and all of that, I could not wait until the next Billy Graham crusade was on television. One of the reasons was that I began to really love and admire the late George Beverly Shea. As a matter of fact, a long documentary piece I did on Shea, which I uploaded to YouTube after his death, has gotten an incredible number of views. Shea, of course, always seemed to be there when it was time to wrap up the crusade and send the message home. With his deep, rich voice, George Beverly Shea also demonstrated a lot of authority. In one of his final concerts in his 90s, he belted out "How Great Thou Art." The audience, tears running down their cheeks, reveled as the old master sang his heart out, never missing a note, in the praise of the Lord. Shea had first sung the song in Madison Square Garden at a 1957 Billy Graham crusade. He sang it every night for 16 consecutive nights. He would sing it so many times over the years in subsequent crusades and personal appearances he lost count. Shea may have sung live before more people than anyone else in history. I would like to think that is the case. There's no reason to doubt that. His contribution to the work of Billy Graham cannot be calculated. Along with the late Cliff Barrows, Graham's long-serving music director, George Beverly Shea brought an incalculable number of people out of their seats to go to the altar. The next time you see an old film of a Billy Graham crusade, just look at the faces of the people as Barrows' music and Shea's voice filled the auditorium. If you believe in the ability of music to be the hand of God, you have proof in what happened each night and every night of every crusade. And in many ways, that was Billy Graham's secret. No fire and brimstone preaching here, no faith healing with people being tapped on the head and falling backward into the arms of waiting assistants, no screaming, no yelling, no talking in tongues, none of that. Billy Graham was as simple as his message, and as powerful. Billy Graham told it like it was, whether people were ready to hear it or not. He was fearless, and his attitude and delivery made others feel that way. Fearless enough to conquer life's problems. Fearless enough to answer the call and to come to the altar. Just about every nation seemed to welcome the Billy Graham Crusades. He ended up preaching on 6 continents, in 185 countries, at 417 separate crusades. His patented method of having a native fellow preacher stand beside him, repeating his words in the language of the people he was visiting, is an indelible image. People who were interviewed after the crusade said that when Graham spoke through the interpreter, they still heard Graham's voice and inflection. Even though Graham was not speaking their language, he essentially was, through his body language and his soaring voice. His message rang true wherever he spoke. It is no stretch of the imagination to see that Billy Graham actually did speak in many tongues. Graham's longest crusade lasted 16 weeks. It was a 1957 event, the one at New York City's Madison Square Garden. He used that venue where prize fighters had beaten each other's brains out to batter some sense into the attendees gently. No doubt some had warned Graham not to attempt a crusade in the Big Apple. That urban environment might not be the right place to spread the gospel. Crowds might be thin. It all might be a huge and costly mistake. But Billy Graham knew the need, and he had faith in the outcome. But it is also safe to assume that attendance, or lack of it, was not the last thing on Dr. Graham's mind as he prepared for the crusade. He was known for speaking to his audience one-on-one. Had he walked away from New York City with but a single convert, that would have been enough. Billy Graham had begun his method of holding crusades, a rather new form of the old revival meeting, in 1947. The first venue was in, of all places, the Civic Auditorium in Grand Rapids, Michigan. More than 6,000 people attended, and that was just the start. As his popularity grew and people sought out his message, the size and prestige of the venues grew. Often as many as 5,000 locals would be enlisted to sing in a mass choir. By 1973, his international appeal guaranteed large audiences wherever he went. But no one expected what would happen at the crusade in Seoul, South Korea in recent years. That crusade marked one of the high points, at least as far as attendance to his ministry. Before he left the city after the final session, more than 1.1 million people had come to hear him. Over the years, the coming of the Billy Graham Crusades became important events in many cities. It wasn't unusual for many denominations to assist in the publicity. It became a quiet fact that whenever Billy Graham came to a city, every church benefited. It wasn't just the Baptists who came. Methodist congregations and even Catholic churches reported upswings in attendance in the wake of Graham's crusades. Graham always brought an awareness of the gospel wherever he preached. Someone once quipped that Graham could speak on a street corner in any small town and someone would come forward. He had that much charisma and ethical magnetism. Billy Graham certainly was the default Protestant religious leader in America. Many others over the years have come to the forefront, then either fading or self-destructing. After Oral, Jim and Tammy, Jerry, Jimmy, Ernest, and the rest had had their day in the evangelistic sun, Billy Graham remained solid as a rock. He was not a big dabbler in politics. While many around him became the spokesman for national civic causes, Graham left most of his rhetoric to the heavenly side of the issues. He could have possibly swung the election to Nixon in 1960 had he played the religion card against Kennedy. But he didn't do it. In his later years, he told a reporter, he regretted any involvement in politics he may have had over the years. His image of stability and bipartisanship, though, won him a place on the dais on the agenda of more than half a dozen political inaugurations. Everyone who preaches the gospel today owes a debt to Billy Graham. Every singer and musician and organist and choir director owes a debt to his organization and the men and women who planned and carried out all the background work that made his crusades such wonderfully comfortable places. Every denomination owes a debt to Billy Graham. He was an anchor and a solid foundation in a time when other evangelists had feet and lives of clay. He was the constant that made others proud to be a preacher. There's a great story about a small-town Baptist minister who is rehearsing his Sunday sermon. His wife walks into the office and tells him she thought she heard a second voice coming from the room. "Oh, I was imitating Billy Graham," he told her. She responded, "Just be yourself. Let Billy Graham do the rest." He may not have been the Protestant Pope, but in many ways he lived up. He may not have been the Protestant Pope, but in his own way he lived up to one of the terms used in describing a Roman Catholic Pope, Pontifex Maximus, the great bridge builder. Whether it was his ability to bring religions together in cities where he spoke, or his ability to bridge international gaps of language and culture and religion, Billy Graham succeeded in his mission. America needed Billy Graham. He was among us longer than most men. For that we are grateful. We need to be grateful. Billy Graham was one of the greatest messengers the gospel ever had, and he walked among us. Billy Graham gave this nation a kind of strong continuum through some really tough times. Through Vietnam and Watergate, unemployment, White House scandals, riots, and embarrassments, Billy Graham seemed to move with a certain ease, a quiet, calming authority. It showed in his message and his voice and his smile. It was as if he was holding God's hand when he spoke. Now he holds God's hand again. I'm Dennis Daly.